The boy didn't even see it coming. A revving engine screamed through the open-air marketplace, cutting through the sounds of laughter, chatter, and late-morning bargaining. A motorcycle tore around a fruit stand at full speed. The rider, a thick-necked man in a sleeveless denim vest, helmet cracked with stickers, didn't swerve, didn't slow down. His back wheel caught the corner of a crate of carnations. The cart spun. The boy, maybe 11, tumbled to the pavement head first, skidding across the warm stone tiles. Blood streaked the edge of his forehead. The biker didn't stop. He gunned the throttle and vanished down the lane, leaving behind a silence louder than any scream. That's when two men stepped forward, one from the far side of the market, holding a paper bag of fruit. The other from the corner of a parked black SUV, arms crossed, expression unreadable, Jason Statham and Steven Seagal. But it wasn't always like this just an hour earlier. The town square had been peaceful. Sunlight stretched across colorful tarps and woven rugs. Vendors shouted over prices. Children darted between hanging baskets, and the boy, the one with the flower cart, had just finished setting up a hand-painted sign that read, "One rose for luck." He was skinny, wore mismatched shoes. But his smile when an old woman dropped a coin in his jar lit up the whole row. Jason Statham was seated outside a cafe with a black coffee cooling beside him. He wore a plain tee, cargo pants, and sunglasses that reflected more than they showed. He wasn't here for a mission. No one had hired him. He was just passing through, a break, or something like it. Across the plaza, Steven Seagal leaned against a stone pillar, watching a pigeons flutter around the fountain. He wasn't there for work either, just quiet. Coincidence had landed them both in the same place, and neither had spoken yet. Sometimes men who have walked through enough fire don't need to speak to recognize another burn. Then the sound came. Not a gunshot, just a motor, too loud, too fast, too deliberate for this kind of street. Jason's eyes lifted behind his lenses. He clocked the biker before he entered the square, saw the way he ignored the roundabout, the way he flattened a crate of oranges without swerving. The path wasn't aimless. It was surgical. Steven moved slightly, shifted his weight off the wall. Watched the same biker carve toward the flower boy, and then the crash. Wood snapped, metal twisted. A scream rang out, raw and high-pitched. Jason stood fast, his coffee untouched. Steven didn't rush. He just walked slow, even a mountain sliding into motion. Vendors shouted. People rushed in every direction. The boy lay motionless, face down beside his overturned flower cart. Red and white petals were scattered across the ground like a ritual offering. His fingers twitched once. A shopkeeper crouched beside him, panicked, unsure what to do. The boy was breathing, but blood ran from his brow. Jason knelt beside the boy, didn't speak. He lifted him gently, propped him against a pillar, and inspected the wound. He didn't ask who the boy was. He just looked up and scanned the street the biker had taken, then stood. The rest of the market froze as Steven Seagal approached, coat barely moving in the wind. He glanced at the boy, then at Jason. Neither needed words. Back at the square's edge, an older man in a vendor's apron spoke quietly to a younger one. "They've been coming through all week," he said. "Fast riders, loud, never buy anything, just look, then speed off." Jason heard him. The locals thought it was intimidation, a prank, or some gang recruitment run. But Jason's gut said otherwise. He looked at the angle of the biker's path. It wasn't random. He targeted the flower boy. Not for who he was, but for what he represented. Young, kind, vulnerable, a signal. That's how gangs clean house before moving in. Not with guns, with fear. Jason didn't speak to anyone else. He just started walking the same direction the bike had gone. Steven followed. A few blocks down, tire marks curved hard around a bakery. Jason traced them with his eyes, found a smear of oil near the curb. And more telling, 3 fresh cigarette butts lined along the wall, stomped in a pattern only people on watch made. Jason touched his earpiece. He didn't have one. Old habit. Steven stood nearby, watching a man on a second-story balcony draw the curtain the moment they looked up. Jason nodded once, then walked. The trail led them to an old industrial zone, abandoned warehouses, rusted signage, weeds growing from cracked asphalt. Jason and Steven stopped near a loading dock, empty except for a single parked motorcycle, not the one from earlier, another, cleaner, a decoy. Jason stared at it, then crouched beside the kickstand. There, tucked under the footplate, a sensor, tripwire-based, crude but effective. Jason didn't touch it. Instead, he stood and turned to the warehouse door. The chain was new. Stephen stepped beside him. Without a word, he removed a folded cloth from his coat. Inside, a palm-sized breeching tool, custom-built. Jason just raised a brow. "Thought you weren't working," he muttered, Stephen's only answer. "Neither are you." Then the lock clicked. Inside, the warehouse smelled of rubber and sweat. Rows of dirt bikes lined the walls. Graffiti covered the beams. Symbols not local, imported. Two men in tank tops stood near a table of burner phones, arguing over a tablet screen. One turned, saw Jason, paused, then reached for something under the table. But Jason was already moving. He crossed the space in 4 precise strides, grabbed the man by the wrist and slammed it down on the metal edge. The tablet clattered. The second man lunged, but Stephen's arm caught him mid-charge, redirecting him into a pillar hard enough to crack it. The first man screamed. Jason leaned in close. "Who sent the bike?" The man whimpered, stammered, then finally said, "He's coming tonight, the boss, to finish it." Jason let go. Stephen glanced at the table, maps, photographs, lists of stalls from the marketplace. This wasn't a random hit. It was a sweep. The flower boy had been targeted for sympathy. The boss wanted silence. And now he just made 2 enemies who didn't go silent. The market was different now. The petals had been swept, but the blood had stained the stone. The boy was recovering at a nearby clinic, minor concussion, stitches, no broken bones. But the silence among the vendors was heavier than ever. No one wanted to open shop. The flower stand sat empty, splintered, as if its absence were a warning. But Jason Statham and Stephen Seagal weren't waiting for another message. They were preparing a reply. The warehouse they'd found had been just a satellite, a scouting outpost. The real center was deeper, hidden behind city permits and fake construction signs. Jason stared at the map taken from the biker den, its corners creased and stained with sweat. On it, a square had been circled, Market Reset Phase 2, and beneath that a name, Devlin. Stephen had heard the name before. A fixer. Known for clearing neighborhoods through intimidation, replacing culture with control, never showed his face. Used enforcers on bikes, tactics stolen from private military playbooks. If Devlin was coming tonight, it wasn't to issue threats, it was to take over. Jason wasn't going to let him step out of the shadows. He was going to drag him into the light. They set the trap in silence. Jason returned to the market before nightfall, walking the length of the cobbled square, head low, steps casual. A few locals peeked from behind crates. Word had spread. The man who carried the boy had returned. But this time he wasn't alone. Stephen stood at the far corner, leaning against a shop gate, eyes on every rooftop. The stall was rebuilt, barely. Not to sell, to bait. A single red rose lay on the table. The same words painted hastily across cardboard. 1 rose for luck. Dusk settled. And with it came the sound they were waiting for. Engines. Not 1, 4. 2 from the north. 2 from the south. The market lights flickered as the square was boxed in. The bikers rode in slow, differently than before. Not chaos, not recklessness, control. They circled once, stopped in formation, blocking the exits. Jason stood behind the stall, unmoving. A breeze pushed dust across the stones. Then came the 5th bike, matte black, larger than the rest, idling with a low growl. The rider wore no patches, just a smooth jacket and dark visor. He dismounted calmly, removed his helmet. Devlin, late 40s, scar running down the left cheek. Eyes dead behind a polite smile. He walked forward like he owned the air. "Where's the kid?" he asked flatly. Jason said nothing. Devlin looked at the flower cart, smirked, then turned to the market. "You people need order," he said, voice rising. "What happened the other day, unfortunate, but it was a necessary signal. This place is a relic. We're going to improve it." Jason stepped out from behind the stall. He didn't raise his voice. He just said, "You're not improving anything. You're leaving." Devlin's face stayed relaxed, but his hand twitched, a subtle cue. 2 bikers advanced. Stephen moved. No warning. He stepped from the shadows and dropped the first with a single pressure point strike to the throat. The second came swinging. Stephen caught the arm, broke it at the elbow, and swept his legs with surgical calm. Jason charged the middle. The 3rd biker pulled a baton. Jason ducked the first swing, countered with a hammering elbow, then used the biker's own weight to slam him into a flower stand. Wood splintered. The rose cart flipped again, but this time, not under a child. The 4th reached for a weapon. Jason kicked it out of his hand, then hit him so hard across the jaw that his helmet snapped sideways. Devlin didn't move. He was still watching, still calculating. Jason turned toward him. The noise stopped. Only wind moved now. Devlin smiled. "That all you've got?" Jason walked forward. "You're the one who hit the boy." Devlin blinked once, subtle but enough. Jason's jaw clenched. "You don't hit kids and walk away." Devlin chuckled. "No one's walking away. You think this is about the boy. This is about leverage. This whole square sits on development rights. I don't need permission, I just need quiet. You messed that up." Jason stopped 5 feet from him. "I'm not the quiet type." Devlin reached slowly into his coat, pulled out a small device, a remote. "You hit me and 5 more come in. This city's mine. You're just noise." Steven appeared behind him. "You should have brought 10. Devlin turned, and Jason struck. A single punch, clean, efficient. Devlin staggered, stunned that anyone dared. Jason followed with a knee to the ribs, then grabbed his jacket and drove him into a steel cart. His head smacked metal. Blood trickled from his temple. Jason leaned down. "You touched the wrong kid." A siren echoed from the south gate, real sirens, police, but not responding to a call, responding to a broadcast. Steven stepped forward with a small flash drive in hand. "I sent the footage," he said. "The boy. The bikes. This conversation." Devlin's face changed. For the first time, panic. Jason stood over him. "You don't own silence anymore." Police swept in. Devlin's remaining bikers tried to flee but were met by barricades already set up on the perimeter streets. Word had gotten out. Authorities weren't just coming for street thugs. They were coming for a systemic cleanse. One by one, Devlin's operations, phony property firms, extortion hubs, front businesses, lit up across the city's law enforcement feeds. Jason and Steven walked away as Devlin was shoved into cuffs. The crowd that had gathered remained quiet, watching not just justice, but something deeper, the return of balance. The boy's mother arrived, crying softly. Jason handed her the single red rose from the rebuilt cart. "Tell him he's tougher than most." Later that night, Jason sat alone back at the cafe, sipping the same cold coffee. Steven joined him without speaking. The market lights flickered back on. A few vendors started setting up early, cautious but hopeful. Jason leaned back. "Not bad for a day off," he muttered. Steven grinned faintly. "Let's not make it a habit." It should have ended there, Devlin in cuffs, the boy safe, the flower stand rebuilt. But Jason Statham didn't feel peace. Neither did Steven Seagal. Something still stank beneath the surface, too clean, too quick. The way Devlin let himself be dragged off without a real fight, the panic only showing when the footage was mentioned. Jason had seen it before. Devlin wasn't the head. He was the leash. The hand holding it was still hidden. Back at the cafe, Jason sat with the same untouched cup of coffee, but this time his eyes weren't on the plaza. They were on the envelope left behind in Devlin's bike, tucked in a saddle pouch marked with a false property logo. Steven laid the contents across the table. Fake ID badges, security schedules, and one photo. Jason's face was in it, from 3 days ago, at the market, and Steven's too, caught mid-stride near the fountain. Surveillance had been running before the boy was even hit. They weren't a coincidence. They were bait. Jason and Steven drove out of town just before dawn, following coordinates embedded on the back of a data tag labeled Cleanup, Sector 4. It led to a private airstrip surrounded by construction scaffolding and chain-link fencing. On the surface, a logistics depot, but underground, something worse. They found a sublevel disguised as a stormwater treatment facility. Inside, holding cells, wiped-down chairs, soundproof doors, no inmates, no staff, just paperwork. Jason picked up a folder, children's names. Not locals, not residents, across the top. Potential transfers. Next to each name, red ink stamps, approved, pending, cleared. Steven looked at a second document, contracts, real estate licenses, city redevelopment deals, all tied to Devlin's company, but the signers politicians. Contractors, NGO partners. This wasn't about turf, it was a pipeline, and the boy with the flowers, he was lucky. The next kid wouldn't be. Suddenly Jason froze, a sound, not boots, not wheels, footsteps, polished shoes, slow. From the end of the corridor walked a tall man in a tailored suit, his hair perfect, his voice calm. "Mr. Statham, Mr. Seagull, I figured you'd trace it back. No name tag, no weapon, just authority." Jason stepped forward, fists flexing. The man raised a hand. "If you harm me, this facility erases everything in 30 seconds. Automatic. You're not here to stop me. You're here to choose." Steven said nothing. Jason replied, "Choose what?" The man's smile didn't waver. Between exposing one bad operation or letting thousands burn just to take down one, Jason's eyes locked on his. Then he said, "I don't pick between lies," and moved. Jason surged forward, but the man was fast, retreating with practiced speed. A hidden panel slid shut behind him. Jason slammed into it, too late. But his distraction had a cost. A small hiss of gas hissed through the vent above. Steven shouted, "Out!" They ran, Jason pulling the drives from the console before the room went dark. Alarms screamed behind them. Outside, they dove into the SUV and burned rubber off the gravel strip. As they drove, Jason pulled up the backup system on Steven's hacked tablet. Only 42% of the data had copied, the rest burned. But it was enough: names, evidence, accounts, photographs. They didn't need the whole web to rip it apart. They just needed a thread. 3 days later, Jason and Steven walked into a press conference disguised as security contractors, hidden in plain sight. A senator onstage was congratulating his team on a new urban renewal partnership, the same initiative marked on the contracts they'd found underground. Jason passed the first USB stick to a journalist in the second row. Steven handed the second to a field agent already investigating the Devlin sweep. By sundown, news broke. The story wasn't a biker gang terrorizing a flower vendor. It was child trafficking ring hidden under real estate redevelopment, broken by anonymous evidence. No names, no heroes. Just truth. That night Jason returned to the marketplace. The lights were back, the air warm, vendors shouting again, not in fear but in rhythm. The flower boy was there too, sitting on a short crate, one bandage across his brow, smiling as his mother adjusted the new sign. "Roses for the brave." Jason dropped a coin in the jar. The boy looked up and smiled. Jason gave him a nod and walked on. Across the street, Steven waited by the car, arms folded, watching. Jason climbed in. No words. They didn't need any behind them. Petals danced in the breeze. Justice had passed through and left something behind. Hope.